This is Legislative Review on Prairie Public. I'm Dave Thompson. Our last one of the 2015 legislative session. And here is our guest, our special guest, is Governor Jack Dalrymple. Governor, thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
And we wanted you to be here because you start the ball rolling by the executive budget. And that was a kind of an interesting labyrinth that the whole budget process went through this time.
Well, it sure was, Dave. We finished up our budget last fall and finally presented it publicly in December. And the oil tax revenues, changed dramatically, like in the next couple of months. And we actually had to go through a big adjustment in the amount of money that was going to be available. So that made it a very interesting process.
And it was an interesting session because there was some reductions in what you had originally proposed, but you had to sign off on it too.
Well, yes. I mean, we all had to accept the reality of the fact that there would be less revenue coming in. I mean, that's a simple fact. The question is, how do you view the long-term outlook? And I encourage the legislature all along to, not panic, not think the sky is falling in North Dakota, take a longer view of things and continue to move the state forward. And I think in the end, they did do that.
That's what I was going to ask. Looking back on it now, did they follow that advice?
No, I think they really did. It was a little bit uncertain along the way. As recently as 2 or 3 weeks ago, we still had huge differences between the House and Senate versions on a lot of the budgets. So it was pretty hard to predict where it would actually land. But I'm very pleased that, in the end, most of the things that we felt needed to go forward are going to move.
I'd like to get into that a little bit, but as we sit here, the legislators have gone home, adjourned sine die, but there is one issue that's still pending out there, and that's the budget for the Public Employees Retirement System. Wanted to get your perspective as you watched that whole debate unfold.
Well, there was definitely a little snag at the end of the 78 days, and I still don't think it was that big a deal, but there was one unresolved issue, and it's unusual in North Dakota. Usually we do kind of, get to the last bill and get to a conclusion, for better or for worse. But I don't think it's a serious problem. I mean, it's just a little glitch in the overall story.
So will they come back in maybe a special 2-day session to solve it?
Well, let me try to explain a little bit what it is. There's been some reference to it being, an issue with the PERS budget itself, which
it's not a budget thing.
It really isn't. It's more a fact that there was a measure attached to that budget. A couple of members of the House of Representatives looked at the health care situation for public employees, and they felt that a couple of conditions should be added to the contract that we recently awarded to Sanford Health. The Senate, on the other hand, felt very strongly that the contract has been signed, it's a done deal, and there really shouldn't be any special conditions on it. So that was just a kind of a fundamental difference of opinion, but it just so happened to be riding on the budget for the Public Employees Retirement System. I think it's, not a catastrophe because what no one has really brought up yet is the fact that the funding for PERS, or the Public Employees Retirement System, is what they call a continuing appropriation. And that means they have revenue coming in every day from their employee contributions into the fund. And they are allowed to operate on those funds, day in and day out without any special legislative appropriation. So they can continue to do their business, and we're evaluating now exactly how far that goes, and I think that there will be a request for an Attorney General's opinion on it.
Okay, so the Attorney General's opinion would cover such things as, can the agency give raises? Is that one of the things that might be covered?
Well, I think there could be any number of things, that could come into question. I think basically the funds are there; they can spend them to carry out the basic mission of the retirement fund. But for a detail, is it explicit enough, that they can do something like give a person a 3% raise or not? I think the Attorney General is going to have to be the one to answer that.
So that opinion is being drafted now, or?
Well, I think it has to be requested first, by PERS and the retirement office. And, then the Attorney General would come with that. But I don't believe that it's like an urgent matter. They will function, business as usual every day. And it's not the type of thing that, has to be done like immediately.
And that's the difference, because it is a special fund agency, if you want to put it that way, versus a general fund agency. If it were a general fund agency, the conversation might be different.
Oh, much different. Because, this is really the public employee's own pension fund. This is their money. This is not state taxpayer money. And so really all it is a kind of a sanctioning of what they do. I think that they can, go several months here and maybe an extended period of time without any issues.
Since we brought up special session, the legislature did reserve two. As we sit here today, do you think there might be a need to bring them back to Bismarck sometime during the biennium?
Well, I would really rather think that the legislators would decide if they feel like they left something unfinished. And then they should willingly and voluntarily, come back to Bismarck themselves and do whatever it is that they think needs to get done. That's the right way to go about it. Will that be necessary? I really can't say right now.
If you had a chance to point to a few initiatives or highlights of what the 2015 legislative session did, what would they be?
Well, there are so many things that I'm proud of that I think were great achievements. But, just in general categories, I think you have to mention tax relief again. A significant amount of income tax relief, property tax relief that combines with things we've done in the last few bienniums for a very substantial reduction in taxes over the last 6 years. I would also mention infrastructure investments, billions of dollars going out statewide, especially into western North Dakota, roads, highways, bridges, county roads, township roads. We are making a huge commitment to our infrastructure. And beyond that, I like to mention some advancements in conservation and outdoor recreation. I like to mention a breakthrough, I consider a breakthrough in property tax reform. We have completely overhauled our statutes in regard to how property taxes operate.
In terms of property tax reform, then, how are taxpayers going to notice it, do you think, when they get their property tax bills?
Well, there's two sides to this. First is, property tax relief, which means that they will see on their tax statement that a portion of their property taxes, 12%, is actually discounted. Then they should also notice that the amount of tax that they have to pay to their local school district is probably about a third of what it was just a few years ago. And that's continuing. That doesn't happen all at once. But we have now an overall cap on the amount of taxes that you have to pay to the school district. And finally, when it comes to reform, I think they will see that all of the spending categories are now very succinct, they're very clean, and they can be compared to other political subdivisions. So when you look at your city's general fund revenue or their general fund mill levy, you can compare that, apples to apples, with the city down the road. and it will make sense. And I think that's a very important breakthrough in the transparency of property taxes, that people can actually evaluate, whether it's high spending or low spending.
Earlier, you did talk about the cap at a news conference. That was one of the significant things that you saw out of the whole reform effort. And I go back to many sessions where caps were proposed and the cities and counties would come in and object. It seems like this one went through without too much discussion.
Well, I think the reason it worked, Dave, is because for the first time in history, really, we did a comprehensive reform of everything. And in the past, if you just change like pieces of it, and then you start talking about caps, it doesn't work because you haven't really, fixed the system. Once we consolidated a whole bunch of old mill levy authorities, into single authorities like the General Fund Levy Authority, then everybody knows, what they have to get done for that number of mills, because it's the same everywhere. And then people can begin to evaluate, what would be a fair overall cap on that mill levy. And we were able to arrive at something that people were able to accept because even the ones that were close to that limit said the new flexibility that we have with our revenues, more than offsets the limitation of having an overall cap.
Since we're in the area of taxes, I would like to bring up the oil tax bill that was introduced on day 70. But from what I've been led to believe, there had been some preliminary discussions, possibly with your office. Is that correct?
No, not really. That bill was, definitely a late entry into the scene. I did not know that was going to be introduced as a delayed bill. And, a lot of people have asked me about it. I have now signed the bill. And yes, it's unusual for a bill like that to begin the process late in the session. But in the end, you had to look at it on its merits. And basically, I think in the end, it can be portrayed as a fair trade-off between triggered lower taxes, which we've had in the past, versus a steady, never-changing, slightly lower rate that we can, count on over time. And I think most people felt that it was a fair trade-off.
Was it a tough call for you on that one?
Not really, because my job requires me to be interested in the reliability of our revenue streams and how predictable they are. And so in that sense, the legislation, makes it better for people who are trying to run a state government.
And one thing in the whole oil arena, you made some proposals about pipeline safety and rail safety, and especially in light of what happened in Castleton with the derailment and fire and some of the pipeline spills. Are you happy with what the legislature came up with?
I am. In the end, they did fund a rail safety inspector directed by the State Public Service Commission and some additional funds for a temporary employee to help with that. It became like a kind of a big issue toward the end of the session, and it's probably overblown in terms of its importance. But I felt it was very important that the state have some function in that area, that there is at least one or two employees that go out there and act, at the request of state government, not of the federal government or the railroad. And if we want to check on something in particular, like some switches, or we want to look at a section of rail someplace, or we want to look at some equipment, we can do that. And that person is going to be directed by the state.
And on the area of pipeline safety, there were a couple of things that came to mind. Of course, just the inspection of pipelines, there's some of that. And also, for the first time, the state's going to be regulating some of the gathering pipelines.
That's right, and we did have a breakthrough there as well. That legislation, I think, was a little bit misunderstood too, It does provide for the Industrial Commission to regulate the monitoring devices, the flow meters, and any other equipment that we need to watch pipelines. And, that's a very important function, I think, especially with, wastewater pipelines, which are filled with like salty water. We need a function in that area. And we did get that. There was a kind of a misunderstanding at the end, I think, that somehow it had been traded off into a study. But that's not really right. There is going to be a study, but the study is going to be to tell the Industrial Commission what monitors to use.
Are you okay with that?
Well, I think it's a big responsibility for those of us who are on the Industrial Commission, I think that we will do a good job. We've done a good job in the past, but obviously this is a fast-moving area. The technology of these pipelines is changing rapidly. And, because of GPS and because of ultrasound and things like that, we can do a better and better job of keeping an eye on them. And we need to do that. And thanks to this legislation, it will be happening.
So you're convinced that this is this is going to make things safer, perhaps?
No question about it. And it's vitally important, that we do that. People have to have confidence that these fluids are going to stay in the pipelines. Just as people have to have confidence that, the trains are going to stay on the tracks. And we have gotten some very, very useful new tools in that area.
At one point, there was a bill that was killed that would have made some of those rules that the Industrial Commission has adopted, especially in oil and gas, sunset, and you'd have to go through the administrative rules process. That was defeated. From that whole argument and discussion, what do you come away with?
Well, I think it was more of a kind of like a little warning shot or something across the bow. I don't think they really expected that it would, change the law or anything like that. But, the Industrial Commission came up with some very complete rules on flaring, for instance, in North Dakota. And, we have actually restricted, the amount of flaring that's allowed in some situations to a certain percentage of your production. And there were some people who thought that, maybe we had exercised a little bit too much authority there, and people are entitled to their opinions. But in the end, the legislature supported what we've been doing, and that bill was defeated.
And the oil treatment, too, the oil treatment rules.
Exactly. That was another one that, somebody, I'm sure, somewhere felt that that was impacting the industry. And but in the end, I think people said, no, the Industrial Commission needs to be able to make those rules and enforce those rules.
Let me flip it and ask if there were any disappointments that you had out of the session.
I really didn't have any big disappointments in the end. I mean, there were a couple of projects that, just couldn't go forward because there was a bit less money than we were expecting. But overall, I feel very good that the things that we were really felt were important have come about.
Since you mentioned projects, it was floated for a while about going back to bonding, especially for buildings. That did not happen. The state has been lucky enough to pay for these buildings out of revenue that was coming in. Is the state going to maybe eventually have to look at bonding again?
I don't know why we would. That was a kind of a quick reaction, I think, when people said, oh, we're going to have less money than we thought. But you have to keep in mind that, really the state government, planned for the possibility of this happening. And we have been setting aside tremendous reserve funds in case, the oil would go down or ag commodities would go down. And really, we were very prepared for this situation. So in the end, it became a story of, the sky is not falling. We are still the number 2 oil producing state in the nation. We are still probably the top agricultural state in the nation. The rest of our economy and technology and manufacturing is doing extremely well. So, let's not go into a state of panic here.
I know the ink is not even dry on the session. The laws don't take effect till July 1, except that they got the 2/3 vote for the emergency clause. But I'm curious, how do you think this is going to set the table for 2017?
Well, I think as we look forward, Dave, I'm just optimistic. I mean, I just think that the things that we have working well in North Dakota are going to continue. And I think, the next session will be more of the same good news. We will have the revenues that we feel we need to do a good job. Our per capita incomes are, getting near the best in the nation. Our employment is among the lowest in the nation. And we have a chance now to create, some real quality of life enhancements for North Dakotans, that are going to be fantastic. So, I think it's, a continuing story, but it's a great story.
You did have one veto that was upheld, and I don't remember you vetoing anything last session.
Well, but not everything is signed yet either.
I was going to say, the one thing that I'm hearing and just whispering in the Capitol is that you'll look at the OMB bill and maybe have some line item vetoes.
Well, we are just working on that now. Actually, I just came from my office reading bills to the studio to talk to you. And yes, we look very carefully at some of these sections in bills that kind of appeared very late in the game. And it's always interesting because once in a while you find something that you had never even heard about, you didn't even know was in the bill. So we're doing that, and we'll see. Something could pop up, but overall, I have not really found anything yet that I feel justifies a veto beyond the first bill that I vetoed, having to do with my authority.
You have the authority in this case over on the legacy fund and whether or not you can use the money in your budget plans for 2017. Interesting bill.
I cling very tightly to my right to propose something to the legislature. And anytime they try to take away my right to propose something, I got to stand up for myself.
Speaking of standing up for yourself, I'm going to ask you a question you probably weren't expecting. Election next year. Have you made a decision about your plans?
Oh, I haven't. Really, with the legislative session going on, would be about the furthest thing from my mind, to be honest with you. But I've told people that Betsy and I, will be talking and making a decision probably, this summer, early this fall. And it won't be a mystery. We will let people know, our plans.
Do you think you have to do this? I'm a media person asking the question, so I'm going to turn it on myself. Is it too early?
Well, yes, in the sense that, as you go through life, Dave, and especially as you go through the later stages of your life, you kind of like to make decisions when they need to be made. And, why would you make them before you need to make them? Life circumstances can always change. So it's more of a general philosophy, I think, than a political philosophy.
So stay tuned. It may happen yet this summer. You might have to hit the ground running maybe in fall.
Well, yes, I do think that, by this fall, it is only fair to let everybody know, what my plans are. I would say that about any politician. Because others who may be interested, need to know the answer too.
To, again, kind of put a cap on the 2015 legislative session, what do you think are the best bullet points to take out of it?
Well, as I said, I think, infrastructure investment, tax reductions, sound fiscal management, and, some nice quality of life enhancements in public recreation and outdoor recreation, conservation. Those are things that I'm going to remember about the 2015 session.
And the things you might forget?
I might forget that last day when we couldn't decide what to do on one last small issue.
But that, again, we'll stay tuned for an Attorney General's opinion on that.
Yes, I think that will clear it up, and we will know. We'll all know, what to do and what needs to be done.
All right. Governor, thank you very much.
Okay.
As we wrap up the 2015 legislative session.
Dave, it's always great to be with you, and we've done a couple of these before. Always fun to do.
Thank you so much. Our guest on Legislative Review, Governor Jack Dalrymple. And for Prairie Public and the 2015 legislative session, good night.